Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking with Joel Klettke of Business Casual Copywriting and CaseStudyBuddy. So Joel started his career in the SEO world as what was called the Lead SEO Specialist at Vovia Online Marketing, and where he served as what he called the agency's resident copywriter. So after that, he started, during that time there, he started freelancing on the side and eventually would transition from writing whatever content is needed kind of service to focusing specifically on conversion focused copywriting, which is something that I want us to dive into early. But another thing that Joel's done is in 2016, Joel recognized a problem in that I personally feel that most case studies were just bad. They're not done very well, and they're hard to do well. So it's not like it's anyone's fault. They're just a hard thing to do. And so he launched a company called CaseStudyBuddy, which is a productized service for producing written and video case studies for B2B businesses that are small and large. And like I said, there's a lot that I want to dive into here, especially around like the multiple transitions you had from custom service to productized and from general to specialist. And so, but really where I think we should start is, what made you focus your efforts on, or made you decide to focus your efforts on conversion copy when you went from, instead of just doing kind of general content writing?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a serendipitous thing, and then also something of a deliberate choice. When I went out on my own in 2013, so like you said, I was agency side. I was built kind of a portfolio there. I was doing SEO though, like that was the focus. And so when I left in 2013, I was just throwing what I knew, which was I knew I could write websites, but I didn't really have the full conversion focus at that time. I was doing a lot of blog content, and I was doing a lot of like ebooks and trying my hand at different things. And I think it's important early on in your career to try different stuff, because you can't know what you're good at or what you enjoy without exposing yourself to it. So I had done white papers and blog posts. I had done ebooks. I had done a little bit of web copy. I had written product descriptions. I tried a lot of different things. And at that time, my brand was just like very much about like the tone and voice and style. I mean, business casual copywriting, that's where the name came from, is all about how I approached it and what the sound was like. And if you wanted to have that voice and tone, I could write something for you in that way. Also my reputation was just built on doing good work, regardless of the format. People knew that if you came to me, I was going to be a professional and I would give you something, that was solid. The transition to conversion copywriting was just like a confluence of different things. I think I had originally been fearful and hesitant to get into anything resembling direct response copy for two reasons. One, because I thought it was sketchy at the time. Like all my exposure to it was like ugly sales pages hawking like boner pills and stuff that like I wouldn't want to buy. And then it all just felt really like seedy. I'm like, there's no way this can work. This is like, infomercials in print, which is funny because now I look at it completely differently. But like all my exposure to it was negative, right? And it was also, if I'm being honest, it was intimidating because, I was used to having my work tied to a KPI when I was on the SEO side, but I'd come out of the SEO world really burned because there you could do great work and then Google could change the algorithm. Or a competitor could swing in and undermine all of it. But when I came across the work of Joanna Wiebe, that was when the light bulb went on, where it's like, okay, there is a corporate and clear cut and really interesting field that takes the worlds I love, the creativity of writing and the ability to be creative with how you communicate, the analytical stuff that I'd learned to love while at the SEO agency. And so then it was like, I feel like I actually, in doing a lot of these different projects, built the confidence to try something new. And in having a role model in Joanna, saw like this can actually be really cool. This can actually be a field that makes a lot of sense for me. And so around 2014, that's where I just started focusing in there. And then the intentional part that I alluded to earlier, I've always kind of specialized in some regard. Like even when I was writing more general copy, the stuff I got paid the most for was writing content for agencies themselves. And I still kind of specialized there. And then, I've understood for a long time the value of owning a particular piece of mental real estate in someone's head. I didn't always do it, but for a while I was the go-to guy for blog content or content for agencies who wanted to win leads. But with conversion copy, it was an opportunity. I understood the value of when you find something you're good at, when you find something you enjoy and that is lucrative, niching down so you can own that mental real estate in someone's head. It's easier to refer me if I am the go-to guy for SaaS companies who want to convert better than it is the go-to guy for people who need writing of any and all kinds. So that was kind of the conscious decision.
I remember, and I know just as a reference, you actually have a couple of like educational, I'd call them like micro courses because there's so much packed into like an hour in each video. And I bought them, and that idea of just being the go-to person for X that needs Y kind of idea. That really is what one of the things that catalyzed me to start thinking about this decision to actually start thinking about what do I want to be the go-to person for, and where does my skill set align, and how can I do that? And so that's where, on the other side of the thing, what I'm trying to take these learnings and apply to is doing that very much. And so with those, I know that you don't talk about them. It seems like you don't market them enough from my perspective, because they were super valuable. But what are I know this is just like a tangent, but what are those, just a reference, and like, what are they for? How did they come about, those two like products, or one product? I don't know.
They're 2 1-hour, I think micro courses is a good way of describing it. They started out as conference talks, which might make some people roll their eyes, but like I hated sitting in conferences and listening to people spit theory and then give examples of like enterprise companies that only a quarter of the audience could relate to, and then be like, okay, see you guys. So every time that I would go to speak, my goal was always, how do I make this super practical, super pragmatic, super applicable, and teach it so that the audience can leave this room feeling overwhelmed at the number of things they feel like they can go and do. Not overwhelmed in terms of like, how the hell do I do this? But overwhelmed in terms of like, I've like just excited at what they can go and apply right away. So these originally, both of these were conference talks, delivered to small groups. And at the time I kind of thought, I'm not going to get a platform to deliver these again. So I had played around with doing courses earlier on, never felt qualified and never made it a priority. But with these, it's like the response was so good at the events. I thought I'll turn these into some talks. So one is called Fishing with Dynamite, and it's all about how to get ideal prospects to come to you instead of having to pitch and beg and plead. And that's the one you kind of talked about, is, where we talk about owning mental real estate. And then I profile, because I also hate advice that's just be like me, because you might not be like me. So I profile the different tactics and strategies and approaches that go into building authority, building credibility, building kind of a name for yourself in a space. And it's only an hour long, but it's dense, and there are a lot of different things. And the goal is not for you to go and do all of it. It's to identify the handful of ideas that will make a big difference and to shift your own mindset. So that's Fishing with Dynamite. The other one is called Mastering Sales Calls or Mastering Client Calls. And that's all about owning the moment when a lead asks to hop on a call. So it's not about cold calling or cold pitching, but it's all about, okay, you've got someone interested. How do you own? And I mean, when I say own, I don't mean like domineer, but how do you own the moment? How do you turn that sales call into a closed deal at a rate you're really excited about? How do you handle objections? So it walks through everything from what and how to prepare to how to structure the call and some very simple scripts for kind of getting the call off on the right foot. And then it talks about handling objections and some tips and techniques that I've found that kind of turn the conversation around, and sort of the goal being to get the other person on the other side excited to work with you. So those came out as originally being conference talks. I finally decided I'm going to record them. I'll put them out there. Didn't have a launch plan at all. I think it's important to be, not to bias the conversation. Like, I've spent years building an audience by solving problems in public. So when I did launch them, I made them absurdly cheap, like $50 for both of them or something. And they flew. Like I've sold over 400 of them now. You're right. I don't market them well enough. I give them a push once in a blue moon. But
I think there's something to that, with that the seediness of the which I think is like, it's sad that there are people who are so toxic in the environment of selling courses and whatnot, that people like yourself, and I've taken courses that have been completely changed my career, my, you know, my life essentially, and they've been so high quality. But then everybody, like, I feel like selling a course, it has that, like, you don't want to be one of those people. And I don't know if that's part of it for you, or like, I
Yeah.
think that,
I mean, I never, that was part of the hesitation to put these out in the first place, is I, to my benefit, I think, and detriment, have for 7 years now been about the work, invested in doing the work, do the work
mhm,
well. And I never wanted to put out a course until I felt like I had not even anyone else's permission, but like till I'd earned the right in my own eyes to be teaching. Because I think some people will go take, you know, a copy hacker's course, turn around, regurgitate it into their own thing, and oh, I'm a course seller now. I didn't want to be that. So, you know, it was an identity thing, I think, for me, is I didn't want to be the course, you know, another course guy. But I think
yeah,
I'm getting over that now. I mean, I'm developing new, you know, courses and learning materials now. So I'm past that, but that
yeah.
did hold me back for a long time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. To bring this back to, you know, one of the things that you were mentioning before about being someone that, and the reputation that you have, or just being someone that's always doing the work, actually doing the thing, and not just like pontificating on the thing. Um,
Right.
I think that there's something that you've been able to do, and you talk about it in Fishing with Dynamite, how you've done it. And I know, like, not everybody's you, but I'm interested in, like, how you've been able to build your reputation when you decided to make that switch, from doing content, ebooks, etc., and just doing really high quality work, to saying, hey, I'm going to help you make more money, which is like you said, it's very honest and true, because it's like, hey, here's the dashboard, and if you didn't move the needle, like, it's very obvious. How did you, so that means, in my mind, it requires a level of trust to pay someone to do that and to invest that money. And so how, in those early days when you were making that transition, did you think about that? Or maybe even looking back with hindsight, what did you do well that ended up working out to help you build that reputation?
So much is about the relationships that you cultivate, the category you put yourself into, and how you manage expectations. And so for me, like I said it earlier, but for a long time, I've been about solving problems in public. What that means practically is taking the things I'm learning, taking the processes that I have, taking my, you know, solving problems for people, identifying, okay, here's an audience that I want to serve. And I want to show them that I understand them, that I have a solution that feels, even though conversion is optimization stuff, it's risky. There's no guarantee. No one can
Hmm.
guarantee. But there's safety and comfort in feeling like you value the same things that the person you're going to hire values. There's safety in feeling like they've got a plan to lead you through that process. And so I spent, you know, a lot of time publishing, sharing, teaching. As I was picking up information, I was turning around and sharing that information, and never with the pretense of like, I'm a guru and I'm like, that's why I didn't sell it. But it was
Yeah.
always about taking the work that I was doing and little by little, you know, attracting that next best project. So in the early days, I didn't go to people. I like, people look at conversion especially and assume that you just jump from being like doing nothing to like doing the full-fledged like A/B testing, full battery of research. Like, it
Yeah.
wasn't like that. It wasn't.
Hmm.
I iteratively improved my offering. I started with what I knew, a brief, writing from a brief to do the website. And then from there, I did some research and I realized, okay, other people, I looked to other people's processes first, right? I look, what does Joanna do? You know, what does this person do? What does that person do? What's their
Hmm.
process? And I started rolling like a snowball, all these different approaches in a way that made sense into what I was doing. So my very first website projects, I wrote just from a brief. And then as I learned more about voice of customer, then it was okay. I would look at reviews and testimonials. I started bringing that in.
Hmm.
And then as I learned how to look at user behavior on a site, I started to bring some of that in. And the thing that was important is I didn't just like amoeba other people's processes, but once I was doing something myself, looking for how do I make this better? How do I make this
Hmm.
meaningful? Does this actually serve me or not? And so it was this ongoing process of like managing expectations with the client. I have never gone into an engagement guaranteeing a conversion lift.
Mm-hmm.
I've never gone into an engagement saying, oh, you're definitely, like the goal is always to make more money, but I've always been very honest about the fact that like, here's what we're going to do. Here's why we're going to do it this way. Here's what I get out of doing that. Here's what you get out of doing this piece of the process. And so I build trust in myself by building trust in my process and by solving their problem in public, so that when someone who has the same problem needs someone to solve it, I'm the guy that they think of.
Mm-hmm.
That's more or less been my entire approach. In the different ways it comes out is a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
But that's the mentality that drives it. Do the work, share the work, get more work.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious with adding to your process and the idea of, taking on new things, of like new forms of research. Of course, in my mind, I think there's every new form of research you're doing, you're like, oh, voice of the customer. So I'm going to start reading reviews, testimonials. That may not take you that long, but then you're like, hey, I want to do like a survey, and then you have to make the survey, et cetera, send it out. How did you, in shifting your process, so adding new to make you better at what you're doing? Of course, you're providing better results as you're doing this, but were you just increasing your prices to account for those deliverables, or were you just like adding them in and doing them so you could do better work and then maybe doing it? Like, how did you think about that so you didn't just like end up doing an extra 10 hours of work for every project at the same price, because I think that can happen.
An extra 10 hours,
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend like I've had a perfect process for this, because I
Yeah.
haven't. I've bungled it a lot to this day. This year I did a project, and then the guy that I did it for has become a friend and kind of mentor of mine. We had an honest conversation. He said, listen, about that web project you did for me, if you would have charged me 3 times more, I wouldn't have batted an eye. It still happens. Okay.
Yeah.
That's why I tell that story. I don't want to pretend like, even at, not to be, I don't want to come think I'm like Mr. Big or anything, but even at the level I'm doing things on with companies at the enterprise level and like 5-figure projects, I still get this wrong. Right. But in the early days, it was like, I took some stuff on the chin because I was figuring it out. I'm not saying you have to do that. But it wasn't like I didn't bill like I had it all figured out all the time. So sometimes, I wasn't, and I was always very honest too. I would say, I want to do a survey, and I'm not going to block my own shot and be like, I suck at surveys, so I hope this works. But I would tell them, like, this is the approach I'm going to take, and I would roll these pieces in. And then as I got confident in them and got more confident at selling their value, I'd add more price point to them. Right. And so that was kind of the approaches. For a while, I definitely undercharged. I think in some cases, like I said, this year, I'm still in the perception that it's a good problem to have when someone comes to you and says, you could have, tripled the price I would have paid it. So there's an awareness that comes with doing that over time. But it was, as you say, sometimes I did the extra hours because I knew on some level, if I get really good at this, it's going to make me more valuable and I'll be able to bill it back. Now, if you're confident, you don't have to do what I did. You can bill for it the minute you start doing it. Just don't, there's a lot of raw charge what you're worth stuff. And I get it. And I believe in it. Be realistic though. If you're brand new to something, don't bill like you've been doing it 10 years unless the quality of your output is like you've been doing it 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, add margin, but don't be crazy. Like a lot of people think, oh, charge what you're worth is charge what Joanna Weed does. No, like you're not her.
You're not
but
worth
you do have value and your approach has value. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I've even like had, run into issues this on my own, where trying to kind of work that out. And then in some cases being like, hey, let's like try this new thing and let's increase the price of the project to account for it. Like I personally on the like design and development front am really into like basically the whole conversion and customer research process or beforehand. And like, in order to actually create a site and a brand and a look and feel that makes sense for a company. And I'm really interested in all of that. But a lot of companies, depending, and this is also part of the reason to shift into more specializing areas, is that it's hard to be like, hey, let's do this research process up front. That's going to take, X amount of time and cost you, let's just say a few $1,000s or something. So trying to think about that, I think is like an interesting like add on a little bit and then like maybe raise your price over time. I don't know. I think it's just like
but that's the thing. Here's the lesson I learned. That's exactly the wrong pitch. Cause that is what, like when you say, let's do this thing that's going to take longer and cost more,
yeah.
the instant reaction is like, no, like, let's not do that. Right. Like I don't, unless at this point I've earned, you know, a little bit more flexibility because the people who are coming to me for me. Like I've been fortunate to build a presence where people seek me out for the type of problem I solve. That's like the dream. That's where, you know, where I wanted to get to. Now I'm there. So, but early days when I was presenting this stuff, I didn't say, yeah, I want to do, I did do this and then I stopped doing it. I want to do a research. Like research sounds like busy work for nerds. So the the opposite is how you present it. I would say, I want to do analysis and strategy. And then this is about pitching it. It's, what is anything you're introducing, right? I mean, part of how I grew too was putting something in a proposal. I'm like, well, now I'm responsible for it. So I know myself well enough to know I'm going to kill it because I don't have like, I can't settle. Like, I know I'm going to go do the work to justify what I just did. But, you know, I would call it analysis and strategy. And then you communicate what's the value of going through this process. Like, it's not just tack on this research component. I'm not saying that that's what you think that is at all.
Yeah.
I'm just, that was the pitch for me for a while. It doesn't work very well. It's about showing them, okay, like when we do this, here's what I'm going to get out of going through this process. Here's what you're going to get out of my doing this. And that's the value, right? And especially with the conversion research side of things, it's like the stuff I learn in this early phase is going to impact the project we do together and the ads you're running and the stuff your content team does and like it compounds. So getting good at pitching the aspects of what you're doing too. Even the way you think about it and you talk about it matters because that will come through when you take it to a client.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm thinking here, like with having like research as a component and as like a service, and basically with your conversion copywriting, it's almost, I want to say it's a customized offering. It's custom offering because every business is different, but you have a similar process. So I think that's like, maybe there's a difference between doing everything completely custom for clients every time, having a specific process that you run people through for doing the type of work you do, and then having like a productized service where it's like, hey, you pay this much, this is what you get. I think that you are now with Business Casual Copywriting at the point where you have, you know, you're very process oriented, conversion copywriting, and then you also have CaseStudyBuddy, which is very productized. Like, hey, you want a case study, it costs this much, and this is what you get. How do you think about is there a big difference between those two compared to like, you know, from one being you just do everything custom for everyone to the second being you have a very strict process? Is there like that big of a difference between the strict process and the productized version as the first to the second kind of idea?
Yeah, there is. Great products come out of great process regardless. Let's start there. So even though, yes, like I don't have productized templates for the landing pages or websites I write, because for the level of work I'm doing on that side, it's like makes zero sense. I do have a modular process that I go through every time. So like I will customize the research and analysis and strategy phase to that client. But within that, I've got micro processes for how I do all that, right? So like if a client comes in and they don't have chat logs, I'm not going to analyze chat logs. I take that out. So that's the customization. And then in the copywriting piece, it's like, okay, I go through the same process of writing, wireframing, presenting, and so on, but it's not productized in that like the output of that and the strategy involved in that mean that it's a different custom output. Honestly, with CaseStudyBuddy, we started out, the goal when I first launched the company was to be purely productized and, you know, in format, especially that for content assets. To me, productization means you get what you get. There's not a whole lot of customization. And so both my like business casual work and CaseStudyBuddy are extremely process oriented. The output is where productization differs. And with CaseStudyBuddy, it's not that we're moving away from any productization, but as the company matures and the market that we're serving matures, we're bringing elements of customization back in. Like on the strategy side of things, we do some consulting now with companies about what types of stories, but we have processes for all of those things. So, you know, that company is evolving into a more custom type of delivery, but based on some core assets. I think no matter what I'm kind of dancing around here is whether you are a full custom business or a productized service, you thrive, you live, you die on the processes you build. Part of the inefficiency of being all things to all people is constantly having to introduce, refine, or, you know, eliminate processes. I can't use exactly the same process to write a product description as an ebook. I have to build new ones and iterate and change gears all the time. Whereas with CaseStudyBuddy, the productization element of it is we're going to go through the exact same steps, the exact same way, the exact, you know, same timeline as much as we can control. Very, very similar outputs, though. Like I said, we're bringing in more customization elements of that. But regardless of the model you want to have, you live and die in the processes you have. And that's why I didn't love staying very general, is even though, yeah, for a time, get your feet wet, try new things. At some point, there's just way more efficiency to be had in doing the same things over and over and over again. And like a lot of people hear that, like, that sounds boring. I want to do different stuff all the time. I hear that from copywriters all the time. Like, I like the diversity. It's like, we have diversity at CaseStudyBuddy. The stories themselves are always unique. It's not that, you know, but the format is the same. You can have counterintuitively consistency and diversity at the same time. Yeah. You just hold a greater amount of control over how you engineer that creativity. So, you know, there's a lot of overlap. There are important differences, but at the core, like, process drives everything. You need it no matter what you're doing.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you know, with having a process in place, you know, you talked about how that kind of developed on the conversion side and adding small things in. Do you think that you can wholesale take on a process as like, here's how you should do X? Or do you think that would you recommend people organically start their way and add in pieces and try things out? How would you recommend? I guess what I'm getting at is, if someone's like, I need to have some processes around the things that I do. I'm kind of all over the place, and they maybe have a niche that they work with, so they're in that position to do that. How do you recommend them, like, even getting into that and starting?
Whether or not you think you have a process, you do. There's a way you do work today. Write that down. What steps are you going through right now? Why do you go through them? And sometimes if you've identified, okay, I'm doing a thing for no discernible reason, you can cut it out. I think it is important that, like with CaseStudyBuddy, every one of our team members follows the same process, right? They all have iterations that work better for them that aren't consequential to the end product. Like, we can't create automatons who just do everything exactly our way, nor would we want to. Here's what I mean by that. Every single writer I have, part of our process that is non-negotiable, they have to go through the brief, have to do it. Now, some of them will mark up parts of the brief and use highlighting and so on and so forth. Others are going to skeleton out their piece. Discerning what's like an integral piece of the process that's a non-negotiable, and then giving yourself and other people the space to do what's effective for them, that's the tightrope. I don't want to mandate to people that they have to do things a certain way within the process if that's not going to serve them. So it's this balance of finding a process that allows you to consistently produce excellence with the flexibility to let people bring their own nuances to it. And so, for example, like, I have picked up and adapted stuff that Joanna Wiebe does, and the steps that she goes through, I go through the same steps, but my individual execution of that step could look completely different from hers, and that's okay. I think it's defining, like, what are the milestone steps I have to go through, which you arrive at by defining why you do that. Like, if you eliminate a why and it tangibly breaks the product on the other side, then, like, okay, you've done something wrong. But it's having, like, bumpers on the bowling alley. Like, you can throw that ball any way you want, but you got to stay in the bowling alley.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think with basically as like for a process at a high level, there's kind of like we do X and then Y and then Z, and you can kind of, there's almost like high level, here's the 5 steps that we do. And then in each of those steps, here's the kind of deliverables at the end of them or whatever, these miniature deliverables. But in how you get that deliverable, like those are almost like non-negotiable, but maybe at that lowest level of like, okay, you're doing an interview and you're asking certain questions, but like how you're sitting in a chair, like is inconsequential, like at that granular level. But as you get up, it's like, you want to keep those rock solid, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, there's especially when you transition from being an individual to being a team, right? There's things that have to exist on this end and this person for this person over here to be successful. So like non-negotiable is like hitting a deadline. Like, that's not necessarily a process thing, but like non-negotiable would be like, okay, we need you when you're done your draft to grant, Morgan access so she can share it back to the client. Like, non-negotiable thing.
Yeah.
But we don't tell our interviewers how to do their hair, like it's none of our business. Like however they want to choose to present themselves professionally, however, even down to things like interviewing style, right? Like there are things we encourage people toward. And I think this is something that I continue to learn is like, you need to articulate your purpose, your North Star, your commander's intent, right? Like in a battle, the enemy gets to say. So like, if we're in a war and we're in a platoon, like our commander's intent is like, okay, guys, no matter what happens, hold this hill. That's the commander's intent. Because if that is the objective. Now in the actual plan, maybe there's other things like this unit will go here. These guys will man the machine gun, blah, blah, blah. But like, okay, when the shit hits the fan and like that unit's gone or like the timeline is accelerated or you're getting flanked, your people need to have the bandwidth to know what they're shooting for, like what they need to achieve. And as long as that's in focus, that gives them the creativity to get there in whatever means possible. Like the objective is more important than the minutia in that case. So there's processes that are non-negotiable because we need them to do that way for this thing to get over the line. And then there's the stuff where it's like, you have to let go and let people be who they are and operate the way they operate and deliver what they deliver. Like you can set standards, you can set guidelines, you define the North Star, you define the critical things, but at some point you have to let go.
Yeah. And with, I think what you brought up is the difference between having people on your team versus not. And so on the hiring front, I think there's a couple of things that I want to dive into with you about specifically, well, one, just because this came up based on what you're saying, have you found that there's a difference between people who are open to, who want everything to be specifically laid out for them and detailed, or people who are open to having that North Star and then navigating on their own and having that autonomy? Have you what I'm wondering is, in my mind, I feel like there's some people that just, if they want to have exact orders, kind of like, hey, here's how many words I need on this essay kind of thing. And there's other people where it's like, hey, write an essay, and they're happy to do that. Is there that difference with people, and how do you kind of try and weed that out in hiring?
There is that difference. I think there are multiple things. We have a culture with CaseStudyBuddy where we try to overtly communicate and encourage a few things. Number one, you're never going to be punished for asking a question. I don't ever want to hire someone who just follows commands and doesn't ever question. Number two, if you see a better way to do things, tell us. There's zero arrogance to the approach that we take. It's if you see a place to, improve things, tell us. I think when we're hiring or when we're looking for people, we're attracted to people who have run their own thing. We're attracted to people who, have worked in different environments and worked in teams, because those types of people are used to owning objectives and adapting to situations. I think at some point though, it's like I'm working on a course right now on how to find, how to plan for, find, vet, and work with writers. And one of the things I talk about in that course is there's kind of the eternal question of like, okay, what comes first, process or people, right? Do you need a really great process and then you put people into it? Or do you need really great people and then you define the process? And I think that's the wrong question. I think it comes back to defining, purpose. So the flywheel is kind of first purpose, then in my view, process, then people. And then as your organization matures, it actually reverses. Once you hit a certain point, your people start to inform and refine and hone and make the process better. So I think it's just about communicating back to people what you're looking for. I think asking intelligent questions during the hiring process of like, tell me about a time when you had to, write a piece that hit a business objective. Tell me about, the best project you ever have done and what did that look like and who was involved. And what you're listening for is where did they take initiative? Where did they, how do they think? Like, I care much more about how people think than what they've done. Samples are great. They're important to look at. Body of work is fine. But when I get someone on a call, what I'm listening for is how do you solve problems? Where do you take initiative? I'm fine to have someone want instructions. We all want to know where the goalposts are so we can win the game. If we don't know what we're shooting for, we're screwed. But that purpose piece is that commander's intent. And I think when you go to grow a business, something I wish I would have done earlier is clearly write down and define. This is the stuff I thought was hokey, but it's like, why does CaseStudyBuddy exist? What's the big goal we're pulling towards? What's the commander's intent? Like, if all else fails, what is our goal? I wish I would have jotted that down and articulated it earlier, because I'm a process guy. I like things to be pragmatic. It's served us well. But as we mature and as we start to solve more complex problems, we need people who can bend and break the rules. Once someone knows the process, the best people break it for the right reasons. That's what we want to iterate toward. And you'll never get that from someone who just wants to follow the process.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And what I'm thinking about here is actually in my last conversation, I was speaking to Davish Canal about his conversion rate optimization agency. And he was talking about how the hardest thing to let go of is the strategy side of things when kind of transitioning and starting a business. And I noticed that, I don't know, this is just something that popped into my head as we're talking on the Business Casual Copywriting. Are you still the sole person doing everything on that end, or have you hired for positions like that? I'll just start there, I guess.
So I don't have a team, quote unquote. There's a small handful of subcontractors that I bring in. I'll call them subcontractors and partners. And they're different. There's partners like Jennifer Hayvice, who, when I have a project, scope's big, I want to collaborate with someone, I call Jen. And she comes in and we tag team it. We have very complementary processes. I don't train her. She doesn't need me to train her. She's the queen voice of customers. So, I'll do partnerships. And it's like we split the pot kind of thing, right? Like maybe I run certain parts of the project I'm better at. She runs parts of the project she's better at. And we come to an agreement on, who gets paid what. And so there it's more like a partnership where it's not like subcontracting. It's not like building a team, because I'm not articulating to her how she does anything. We just collaborate. Then I've got subcontractors like Rachel Buchert or Luke. And those are situations where I do more mentoring, but it's very one-to-one. So these are people I've identified as having all the right tools in the toolkit. In some cases, they like both Rachel and Luke run their own businesses. In some cases, they're not as, like Rachel loves the work, isn't as wild about the running the business side of things. And so in that case with Rachel, it is more of me teaching and coaching and mentoring. And then again, we split up the work, but I handle more of the, the strategy piece and the client side. It's not like Rachel increasingly, as she gets better, she handles more and more of, her parts of the strategy. But the goal with Business Casual, at least as it sits right now, like I get a lot of people asking me, oh, why don't you build an agency? Why don't you build an agency? And like I could realistically, like the caliber of client and opportunity that I'm getting now, I've moved in 7 years of doing this on my own, from being the guy who writes $3,000 websites to being the guy who, sends across a $30,000 proposal and nobody bats an eye and people say you could have tripled things, right? So it's like, I've gotten to the point where I could be doing that kind of work. The reason for me right now is the nuances of hiring and training and retaining for conversion are very different than CaseStudyBuddy.
Yeah.
Like, I love my team at CaseStudyBuddy. They're all exceptional. But realistically, the skill set you need to write an incredible customer success story is way different and way easier to find than someone who is like super deep on conversion end to end.
Yeah.
So, I recognize that one day I do want to hopefully grow business casual, but for now I love the partnership side. I love subcontracting when it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need this thing to be a gigantic agency. And the other thing people forget, I'll end on this thought for this bit here though, is like, there's a challenge with agencies. The minute you have an employee, you have overhead.
Mm-hmm.
The minute you have a team, you're responsible for them. The minute that you work with multiple people, you need to engineer consistent processes and all of this, right? So
Yeah.
I don't have to deal with any of that really with a
Mm-hmm.
partnership. I can be agile. I can make my money. I'm not absorbing a bunch of the cost or overhead that I would. So in some cases, it's actually more profitable not to do some of those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
to be all in on it.
That's what it's so funny because Davish on the literally like right before this we were talking and he was saying how he was like, honestly, I know a lot of people who are solo who are, didn't start an agency that are actually probably more profitable than a lot of the people I know who started an agency and with a lot less of the headaches. And so it's something to 100% think about there.
Oh, thousand.
What comes to mind with the like difference between the case study buddy and business casual is the idea that business casual requires that strategy component of like a lot of time of learning and understanding the nuance around conversions and writing that sort of copy. Whereas on the case study buddy side, it doesn't require as much of the strategy component. And I think you were saying you're starting to add that in custom to things, but do you see that? I think that offering strategy in my mind seems like a very like profitable thing to do because you're selling expertise, but at the same time, it's a lot harder to hire for and do that. Is that how you view it? And does that sound right for how things are going for you?
Yeah, I mean, again, don't get me wrong. Like there's a lot that goes into writing a customer success story well, right? But the skill set that takes is just easier to find and easier to train for than end-to-end conversion copywriting. Like with conversion copywriting, you need to find someone who is creative and analytical and strategic and can wireframe and like, could I break that process out and have different parts, different people? Totally. But realistically with Case Study Buddy, there's more immediate anyways scalability because we don't, for example, like even if we look at the polished designed final asset, right? Whether it's an HTML page, whether it's a PDF, it's something we can template, we can tweak to meet, like follow a customer's brand, colors and logo and everything. We can still, with very minimal effort, make it feel completely unique to them versus with conversion conversion copy. I mean, I can teach someone the process of watching recorded user sessions. I still need that person to be hyper analytical because the endpoint is not defined. Like the learning they're going to take away from that, there's things we look for, but they need to be more critical than, like it's just a different level. So there's still a massive separation between someone who sucks at writing a case study and someone who's amazing. On my team, we have people that I think are amazing and they have amazing, unique skill sets to do that, but it's just easier to find that. And the other big risk with conversion too is the minute, like if I invest, we've all heard the quote, like, what happens if I train them and they leave? And then, what happens if you train them and you don't, they stay? But that's the realistic thing too, is conversion optimization is in its infancy so much still that the minute someone realizes they're amazing at conversion copy, if they have the slightest inkling that they're also good at running a business, I can no longer afford to work with them.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's a valuable, unique skill set in that way. And I think, one thing that I don't want to skip over, that I definitely want to talk to you about is that you have a lot going on, clearly. You had, I don't know if it was a year and a half ago or so, or 2 years ago that you had your first child. And now you have another newborn on the way. So you've been very much running and starting companies while having a newborn and, and also not just like running and starting companies, but running and starting companies where you're in demand. And I think that that's something that's important to note. Like you've had a lot going on. So I'm curious, like what has been, I'll just like start off with something pretty general. Like what's been like one of the best things that you've done to be able to actually let you, maybe I don't even want to say without driving you crazy, because I don't want to assume that you're not like sometimes like all over the place trying to figure things out, but like what has been one of the best things that allowed you to do so much with so much going on?
This is cheesy, but marrying the right person for sure. I could not do what I do without having Courtney to take care of Linus and give me the space to do that. I mean, I'm not suggesting people watching just go get married for that reason, but
Yeah.
but on a similar note, like the right people. The hardest part of business, I think, is people. Like skills you can learn. Finding good people and hanging on to them is like the ultimate asset. One of the best move we made, period, for CaseStudyBuddy so far has been hiring a dedicated project manager. When we brought in Morgan, everything changed in terms of being able to let go and offload and know that someone had our best interest and was working to take care of it. If I could get in a time machine and go back to the very beginning, I would have done that so much sooner. And now we're trying to do it all the time. So finding and retaining the right people and recognizing where you need to get out of your own way and then actually doing it is huge. In terms of managing, I mean, I'm going to be honest, this week has been me saying I say yes to too much and I'm overwhelmed. And like our second is due any day now. So to some degree, it has been, I hate the hustle mentality and I don't see myself as someone who quote unquote hustles. To some degree, though, it is an acknowledgement of like, I'm going to need to do an absolute metric ass load of stuff right now so that I don't have to do it later. The problem is when you don't stop thinking that way, where you always make it about you. That's how we got into trouble with CaseStudyBuddy. I was thinking, oh, well, we can do it. And then, oh, she can do it. Like before we had Morgan, one of our interviewers, we transitioned to doing interviews and project management this is not a discredit to her at all. She did the best she could with what she had, but we didn't even recognize how big the problem, the demand on her time had gotten there. So we weren't setting her up to succeed. So people is one thing. I think in particular, not being afraid. So this comes back to like what we talked about earlier, but the minute you realize, number one, I've got the skill set to do this confidently. Two, it's valuable. Charging commensurate with that makes a big difference. I couldn't do what I do if I was still charging $3,000 for a website. Are you kidding me? I'd be frantically trying to fly through work. So part of why I can do what I do is because I have learned to charge, still getting better at it, clearly, given conversations I've had, but charge more when it's clear that we're providing that value. I mean, people don't really know it too, but back to the people front, like I have a partner at CaseStudyBuddy, like Jen, not Jen Hayvice, but Jen, my partner at CaseStudyBuddy. Like I split the load there from the beginning because I recognized if this is the Joel show, number one, this company will suck. Number two, nothing will get done. So, people is a big part of it. And then I think the thing that I still struggle with, but I'm getting better at is like when you have an entrepreneurial lean and when you have skills and when you have abilities, the danger is you want to use them all the time. So you say yes to everyone. That'll kill you. That's what I'm dealing with this week is I thought I was winding down to get ready for this baby to come here. And then, when certain companies roll through your inbox, your eyes get wide and go, oh, I can handle it. I can handle it. I can do it. Maybe that's the point I'm driving at too, is like recognizing when you can't handle it, getting real self-aware. Something I still struggle with, but that makes a difference too. When you really start objectively looking at, can I handle it? I wish I had like a step-by-step plan for people, but by and large, I'm still in a place where I do too much and I don't delegate enough. I've gotten better at it, but it's tough. Like you have to be focused on, making time to just think and be focused. Like, you have to decide where you want to play. And that's where I'm at today, is kind of pulling the trigger on some of that stuff. But I don't know, somewhere in that rambling mishmash of things, I hope it
Yeah,
was a good idea too.
no, for sure. I think that now that like we're coming down to the end of time, I just want to ask you one more question here, just like wrap things up. Is there one, if you had to give one just general piece of advice, it could be about any part of things, but for someone that is going from being a generalist to being a specialist, as you did at Business Casual Copywriting, and making that switch, what would be like your number one piece of advice or thing that someone should do while making that transition in order to do it successfully?
Solve problems in public. It's what it comes down to. Like, you specialize because you want to be known for something. Get clear on what you want to be known for right now. I'll add this caveat because I think this is an important thing. You'll get freaked out about specialization because, like, what if I change my mind? I live in two worlds. I get to be the case study guy and the conversion guy. You can do it. You can change your mind. It's not a death sentence. You're going to do the same thing forever. But you do need to decide. And once you decide, look at the audience you want to serve. Look at the problems you solve for them. Stop thinking in terms of services. What services? What products? Think of the problems you want to solve and who you want to solve them for, and start doing that in public. Whether that's teardowns, whether that's publishing on the subject, whether that's being part of groups where your audience hangs out and freely offering up advice, whether that is working towards joint webinars and speaking gigs, whether that is just, like getting really, really good at articulating the process behind the way that you approach things. When you want to specialize, solve problems in public. And that way people will know when they have that problem or someone else has that problem, you're the go-to X for Y who needs Z. The go-to woman for pet companies who need an email series is a hell of a lot easier to refer than, I think she writes stuff. Like, that's the goal. If you can tightly define that, you're ahead of the game.
Awesome. Well, this has been really, really great. I've gotten so much out of this. I'm sure like anyone else who's in a similar position to me is definitely going to get a lot. I just want to say at the end here, is there anywhere, for the mini courses that you have, I wasn't even able to find where they are online, and other places where people can find you online, where should people go if they want to learn more, et cetera?
Yeah, for a conversion guy, I just do a miserable job with my own stuff. I've got a shoemaker's kids problem. BusinessCasualCopywriting.com is where you can find stuff I've published. Sign up for my newsletter. At some point in the not too distant future, I will actually link to my courses and trainings from that site. Otherwise, BusinessCasualCopywriting.com/sales-trainings is where you will find those. You can get in touch with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I don't always respond quickly, but I do always respond. 9 times out of 10, unless I open it at 5 a.m. when a baby's screaming and forget I ever saw it. But yeah, that's places you can connect. And probably the best place to go right now, honestly, is my newsletter. That's where I'm sharing new courses I'm developing, insights, ideas, stuff I'm working on, teardowns. I'm pretty active there. So
Awesome. Well, this has been great. Thanks so much.